Whew. I'm like, I am like capital P pooped right now. And just so tired. And there's this weird moment where it's like you're exhausted, but also you don't want it to end. Like it's Sunday morning of Winter Chill, and for some of y'all, it's your first time, you're like, this is the craziest thing I've ever been a part of, and I love it. And now I know why my friends have been so annoying about wanting me to come to this for the past several years, because it really is like the best weekend of my year. Like I love a lot of the stuff that we get to do, and we're really fortunate to do some really fun things, but Winter Chill is just the jam. And then for some of you seniors, how many of y'all are seniors? Yeah. I'm tired too. But for some of y'all, it's like, this is your last session as a student. We will convince some of y'all to come back and lead groups of 7th graders next year because you don't know any better yet. But for a lot of you, it's this weird moment where you're like, yeah, okay, like I don't really want this to end. And so this morning, we're gonna be in Luke chapter 9, but as you're turning, there's something about Winter Chill that's special. And it's not by any like thing that we've done. God just tends to do stuff here. And for decade after decade, he has done stuff over these weekends. And there's just this weird like buildup of anticipation. This past week, some of y'all who were like super type A, you have been packed since maybe December. And you're so excited. You're like, I know exactly what I'm gonna wear, and I know what I'm gonna bring. I'm gonna go get a new jacket, and it's gonna be great. And I just can't wait. And here's my list of snacks that I need to make sure, and I go buy enough for everybody in my cabin. And like, I don't know who you are. Nobody in my cabin ever bought snacks for other people. I just hear stories. Others of you were sitting in your first class on Friday, and you're like, oh, Mom, I forgot underwear. Can you put that in my luggage? And you show up to your campus on Friday, and you're loading up on your bus, and then it's just that really long, it's not like hard, but it's a really long drive. And then you pull down that turn down to the country road, and everybody who's been before starts looking around. You're like, what sucker doesn't know we're about to launch into the stratosphere on this hill? I just need to see how high they get. And so they do. And then you can tell who has not been to Winter Chill before, because they're like, ah! And like they stop themselves before they say something they shouldn't say, usually. And it just is all kinds of chaos. And then you pull down around that corner, that road over there, and it's pitch black, but you see the warm glow of all the porch lights. You're like, we're home. And it just feels good. And the doors open in that just like biting cold air this year. You're like, I had one leader who was like, dude, you didn't tell me it was gonna be cold. I didn't bring a jacket. It's like, you're an adult with a phone. Like, look it up, man. And some leaders told me even at the campus, like, it's gonna be cold and I should have brought a jacket. And I was like, yeah, buddy, you should have. And so we unload and we get to our cabins. It's all this chaos and this energy. And then we come into this space, into the conference center, the worship center. And if I'm just being honest, I think this space for our student ministry is a sacred space. I think New Life Ranch, over the history of Fellowship Student Ministries, has a special place in the hearts of our church. But I think there are hundreds of students who this actual building, even though it's only 5 or 6 years old, this space, within these walls is a sacred space because God does something profound and incredible in this time together. He does something that we just can't put our finger on, but I think that it's gonna be 10, 15, 20 years from now, and some of y'all, by God's grace, will be cabin leaders for Winter Chill. And you'll come back in here and you're like, oh, I remember when I was a 10th grader. I don't remember the theme and I don't remember anything, but I do remember, I remember what God said in my cabin. I remember what God said when we were walking through this passage. I think the years of Winter Chill in this space have a shaping effect on our student ministry back in Central Arkansas. And then as we're gonna experience in a second when we go have our cabin debrief time and then load up and have lunch and get back on the buses, it's this weird tension that we feel. For students where we get to the top of the hill and we turn back on the interstate and you're like, finally reliable cell phone service, yes! Mixed with like, but that means it's done. And for the adults, it's like, finally I get to sleep in my own bed tonight, yes! Mixed with like, I gotta be at work in how many hours? Okay. it's just this weird tension. It's this mountaintop experience. And last night and yesterday, we talked about the valleys. We talked about some really hard stuff that happens when we're following God in the wild. But I think there's also these mountaintop experiences that God gives us. I think there's these moments of clarity, these spiritual highs that God allows us to walk through, and he brings us through for a really important reason. I think that really this weekend, hopefully, is something special. When you think about a mountaintop experience, you get to the top and it's briefly lived, but you're there and it's just crisp and it's clear and there's a level of assurance and hope that you find. And if I'm being totally honest, this may not come as a surprise to you. Our team desperately wants this weekend every year to be a mountaintop experience for you. We spend 9, 10, sometimes 11 months of the year planning, crafting, praying, and leaning into some minor details and some big picture things with the hope and the prayer that God would use these weekends to be a mountaintop experience for you. And we don't pretend otherwise. That's part of what God's called us to do in this. And so before we even dive into Luke chapter 9, I want to recognize some people that have done a lot of work to try and do this weekend with excellence. And I'd love, just as we kind of name some names for us to show our appreciation. And first off is the tech team in the back who've been booking it. There's actually, there's a crew of tech that show up Thursday before junior high winter chill to the West Little Rock campus at 6 a.m. and drive a Penske up here, spend a day and a half setting all of this environment up and making sure it's good to go. And there's a handful others that are coming up right now to help tear all this down so that maybe they'll be able to go home by 10 o'clock tonight, because there's just a lot of things to make this what it is. And then we also have, I don't know if they're in here, but we've had some junior high girls who've been running around like making everything happen. I don't know where they are, and they'll be really embarrassed, but they've been a huge help. Tyler Kemp from Cabot campus has been running this whole thing. He has been in charge of everything Winter Chill and has been just crushing it for months. And then Joanna and Trish and Carly, who have made everything actually happen. Cameron Magby, who is home being a dad. This whole theme, like the direction of this was birthed through something that God put on Cameron's heart. And he even said, like, I'm not gonna be there, but I really feel like this could be cool. And so Benton campus, Cameron's not here, but a lot of this is what God has been doing in his life that he pushed into our team through some meetings and stuff. And so, and then Jake and the worship team who have been leading us directly into the presence of the Lord. And y'all know what's next. Last but not least, your cabin leaders who have given a weekend to hang out and invest in y'all. It has been a blast. And we really do, like, we pray for a long time. The teaching team, parents, the leadership team of our church, the elders of our church, our staff, everybody has been praying and leaning in and begging God to do some incredible things in this moment. And some incredible things over the course of this weekend so that you would have a mountaintop experience. And we want that when you go back, for you to say, yes, I experienced God at Winter Chill. And when you think of the life of Christ even, some really formative things, like yesterday morning, we looked at what happens in the valley, what happens in the hard seasons, but in the actual geographical valleys. And when you look at the mountains in the life of Christ, you see he had some pretty significant moments. We have some strong recorded prayers, some of his preaching. He called some of his disciples. He sent them on mission. He gave his life and laid it down all on top of a mountain. And we want these mountaintop moments just to last forever. Like we walk into those, we're like, like I don't want this to end. And why is that? It's because it's awesome. But here's what I think. And I hinted at this yesterday. I think the mountaintop moment is not designed to last. I think the mountaintop experience, that spiritual high that hopefully you guys are experiencing even this weekend, is not intended to last. Because we've seen it every single year. You go to Winter Chill and you have this mountaintop experience, and it is incredible, informative, and shaping. And then by like mid-March, you're just back to where you were. And then you feel guilty because you don't have all of the emotional passion and all the energy and excitement that God put in your heart at Winter Chill. And hear me say this, like, if God has sparked something in you, we want to stoke that fire. We're not saying just ignore what God did, but I wonder if maybe God uses the mountains for a different reason in our life. I wonder if maybe God uses the mountains to do something in us that's more than just a camp high or a Winter Chill high. And so this morning in Luke chapter 9, we're gonna walk through one of those stereotypical mountaintop experiences that many of you may already be familiar with and see what might it be that God uses this for. And so in Luke chapter 9, starting in verse 28, about 8 days later, Jesus took Peter, John, and James up on a mountain to pray. And we could spend all morning just on this verse, and we won't. But I just wanna point out, this is a usual rhythm for Jesus. He takes a few of his friends and they just get away and they pray. This is not like an unusual thing. This is a typical thing. There's a rhythm of prayer in community that I think is important for us, but I'll leave that soapbox for later. So we'll just keep going on to verse 29 because it's about to get weird. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was transformed and his clothes became dazzling white. Now, in the book of Mark, recounting the transfiguration, it even says like his clothes were whiter than anything bleach could accomplish. So they're up on this mountain and Jesus like becomes a manifest like physical version of light. And here's what we see when we look into the Greek word that gets translated as like transfigured or changes. It carries with it this idea not of changing into something that wasn't before, but of kind of like taking the next form. What we get when we look at all of these passages put together is this idea that Jesus is now more of who he already was. It's not that Jesus has changed. It is that in this moment on the mountaintop, we experience a more full version of who Jesus is. In this moment, heaven, eternity, the goodness of God breaks into creation. And as a result, Jesus metamorphizes into this light. His physical appearance changes because Jesus is, and we know this, he's 100% God and 100% man, and that's really important here in a second, but it's really important at all times, but in the story in a second. And because of that, he acts as a bridge. He's 100% man, which means he can understand us, and he chose to lower himself into the physical form of a human, and because of that, he's able to understand and empathize with us, but he's also 100% God, which means he is able to be in the presence of the Father. Which means he's perfect, all powerful, all knowing. So he serves as a bridge in between those. And so in this moment on the mountain, we see the glory of the Lord breaking into creation in a way that rarely gets recorded. And so in this moment, there's you could argue a greater experience and a deeper experience of who God is and what eternity is designed to be. For a brief moment, heaven kind of shows its cards a little bit. And then we see it gets even more weird. Verse 30 and 31. Suddenly, two men, Moses and Elijah, appeared and began talking with Jesus. They were glorious to see. They were speaking about his exodus from the world, which is about to be fulfilled in Jerusalem. Now, this is super weird. Like, if we're just being honest, they're up on a mountain, they're praying, and then boom, Jesus is like bright white, shining light, all this stuff, pretty crazy. And then all of a sudden, Moses and Elijah are there. And for years, like, I just didn't really understand what that meant, like why that mattered. But without getting into too much detail, here's the significance and the symbolism of what that is. Moses shows up, and Moses is a symbol of the law. Up until this point, Jesus has his earthly ministry, but the church hasn't started. So when you think about it, like the New Testament doesn't exist yet. So we would say from our perspective, Moses is a symbol of the Old Testament law, but for them, it's just the regular like law. So he's a symbol of that. And the law was how God's people followed and obeyed God's will. So Moses, this symbol of following and obeying God's will, and then Elijah, who's a symbol of the prophets. And all throughout Israel's history, the prophet is how God speaks to his people. And so we have Moses, the symbol of the law, how God's people obeyed him, and Elijah, the symbol of the prophets, how God's people heard from him. So we have these two symbols talking with Jesus about what is about to happen, which is Passion Week, which is he's on the cusp of giving his life and laying it down for us. But in this moment, on the mountain, Jesus, the Son of God, a symbol of how God's people obeyed him and how God's people heard from him. And what we find is a symbolic passing of the baton. And we see Jesus even alluding to this in John. You don't have to turn there, we'll have it on the screen, but in John chapter 5:39, Jesus says, you search the scriptures because you think they give you eternal life, but the scriptures point to me. The law that has been given to you, you think that is what brings you life, but I am the one that brings you life. I am the fount of living hope. I am the way that you have a connection to the Lord and you follow him and you connect with him. And so Moses, there's a symbol of the law, the passing of the baton, saying it all pointed to you. And then Hebrews, one of my favorite chapters in the Bible, but just, I won't drag you through all of that, but I will drag you through the first 3 verses. Hebrews 1:1-3. Long ago, God spoke many times and in many ways to our ancestors through the prophets. Now in these final days, he's spoken to us through his Son. God promised everything to the Son as an inheritance, and through the Son, he created the universe. The Son radiates God's own glory and expresses the very character of God and sustains everything by the mighty power of his command. And when he's cleansed us from from our sins, he sat down at the place of honor at the right hand of the majestic God in heaven. This beautiful poetic passage that says it used to be the prophets that God spoke to his people, but now it's Jesus. So on the Mount of Transfiguration, Jesus, the Son of God, speaking about what's about to happen, him laying down his life, conquering sin, conquering death, all of those things. And it's as if the law and the prophets are saying, we were pointing to you. We were here for you, because you were on your way. And it's time. Not in a way where they're instructing Jesus, but it's just this moment where we see some foreshadowing of what's about to happen. And so you got to think in this, man, if you are witnessing this, Peter, James, and John, you are like losing your mind, because this is the weirdest, craziest, most awesome thing that has ever happened on the face of the earth. And then we see in verse 32, Peter and the others had fallen asleep. That is the most confusing verse in all of the Bible to me. But whatever, I don't get how you can do that. But we'll keep reading through verse 35. When they woke up, they saw Jesus' glory and the other 2 men standing with him. And Moses and Elijah were starting to leave. Peter, not even knowing what he was saying, blurted out, Master, it's wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters as a memorial, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. But even as he was saying this, a cloud overshadowed them and terror gripped them as the cloud covered them. And a voice from the cloud said, this is my son, the chosen one. Listen to him. Peter's response when he wakes up and sees the inbreaking of the presence of God is the same thing that we get to. It's, yes, this is good. I want to stay in this moment forever. I want to stay here. I don't want this to end. And it's the same thing that we experience, because it gives a glimpse into what life was supposed to be. When we experience a glimpse of the eternal, our soul just goes like, yes, I want that. I need that. There's something about that is just good for my soul. So Peter doesn't want to leave. He don't want to leave the mountain. He wants to continue on. And so this morning, as we look at this passage that we just walked through, I want to give you 3 things. This is not a go take the mountain, ready, go fight, win kind of a charge. This is 3 things that I think God does that we see in this passage through these mountaintop experiences that I hope serve you well in the next week or 2 as you process what God's done this weekend, but also for the next several years to come and for the rest of your life. These 3 things I hope will shape the way that you view the ebb and flow, the up and down of where God takes you in the wild. And the first thing that we see that happens on these mountaintop moments is that it gives us a deeper experience. It gives us a deeper experience. These 3 men, Peter, James, and John, experienced the presence of God in a way that very few people who have ever walked the face of the earth have ever experienced in their entire life. And as a result, they got a glimpse into eternity. These mountaintop experiences resonate with our souls because they are a whisper of what we were designed to have in the first place. And here's what I think about Winter Chill. Because of God's grace and the way that he works these weekends, I think there's a glimpse into the eternal. There's a glimpse into what we were created for. In Ecclesiastes 3:11, this really interesting verse, we'll have it on the screen for you, says this: God made everything beautiful for its own time. He's planted eternity in the human heart, but even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. It says, in your soul, in the very fiber of who you are, is the recognition that there is something eternal. The recognition and the gaping hole where you are craving this experience of the eternal, but we as in our broken form as humankind don't have the capacity to take that in. It's as if we're this sponge that can never be fully filled. And so when we get a glimpse of the eternal, when we get a glimpse of heaven, when we get a glimpse of God's design for us, it just resonates with us. We're like, God, I don't want that to end. I need more of that. And so that's what I think God does at Winter Chill. Because when you think about what makes Winter Chill so formative, I think it gives us a glimpse of the eternal. Not that I think heaven is this perpetual worship service, but think about some of the markers that make Winter Chill so special. There's no distractions from life. Ideally, there's no stress from relationships or hurt or pain. You get to leave behind the drama of your life for a weekend. You dive into his presence in worship. The Bible seems to make sense as you're talking through it. Your small group community clicks. It is a lot of fun. You're surrounded by creation. There's laughter everywhere. New relationships are formed. Existing relationships are strengthened. And we experience this for a weekend. And these are all things that we are designed to have. And our soul longs for it. And so we walk through and we're like, God, that is just good. And we resonate with it, and we crave it, and we desire it. And there's something that we can't quite express that's just so special about it. It's because when we're having these mountaintop experiences, it gives us a deeper experience of the things that we were designed to have. And I believe gives us a whisper, not even a full bite, just a taste or a glimpse of what eternity is gonna be like. The second thing it does is it lets us reset our direction. It lets us reset our direction. The disciples are up on the mountain and Peter's really excited all of a sudden. And he starts talking and he gets a little distracted. And in fact, in verse 33, we can put it back up on the screen if we can, but it says, Peter just starts talking. Like he doesn't even know what he's saying. And just as a side note, like a little life hack, if you don't know what you're gonna say, don't say it. Like just don't start talking. And we all have that friend where it's like, oh, now they started talking. You're not gonna take a nap or something, they're just gonna go. They're not gonna stop. If you don't know what you're talking about, don't talk. It'll be better for you. And here's kind of the funny thing. Let's put verse 34 back up there. This is one of the most underrated moments of humor, I think, in Scripture. It's very rare that God's presence physically and audibly manifests in creation. And one of those is to tell Peter to shut his mouth. Like just imagine last night when you're trying to go to sleep and there's one person in your cabin that's just talking. Just imagine you're trying to go to sleep, they're yapping and talking and you're like, I gotta sleep. And then all of a sudden it's like thunder, lightning, clouds fill. And they're like, Vance, shut your mouth. This is the Lord, go to bed. Like that would be awesome. Like I imagine Peter never lives this moment down for the rest of his life. Bless his heart. But here's what he does. God not only like just says, shh, be quiet. What he does, he says, it's not about this moment, it's about Jesus. It's not about what actually is happening on this mountain, it's about Jesus. God takes their focus and moves it from this moment in time and says, yes, this is good, that's fine, but I need you to follow Jesus. I need you to follow my son. I need you to listen to him. The mountaintop experience gives us this clarity. When we're up on top of a mountain, we can see where we've been and see where God's calling us to go. It lets us kind of take that change. And so for some of you, last night was a moment of clarity when you started looking at the idols of your heart. Or maybe yesterday morning was a moment of clarity as you started looking at how God has used your life and your highs and your lows. And so the question is not necessarily what's gonna happen here. The question is, when you're up on a mountain and you're going this way, are you able to have the presence of mind and reset your focus and say, okay, I feel like Jesus is calling me to do this? Because if you go back down the mountain this way and he's calling you to go this way, you're gonna go in very different directions. So I think God gives us these moments, these mountaintop experiences to let us reset our direction, let us change the focus of our lives and have the presence of mind and the conviction in our hearts from the Spirit to make the changes we need to make, which means the question becomes, will the clarity of Winter Chill change the direction of next week? Will the clarity that you experience right now and you know what changes you need to make, will you commit to those now? And for some of you, they're very small changes. Some of you, there may be some big changes, but some of you came to the top of the mountain, you had this experience, and then you know, like, you're heading this way, and God's just calling you to make one tiny change, and that's it. But when you have this moment of clarity and you can see what God has shown you, that's the time to do that. That's the time to regroup and to reset. As the band comes up, the last thing that we see is that it refreshes our hope. It refreshes our hope. Yes, it gives us a deeper experience of God's presence. Yes, it gives us clarity to reset our direction, but it also refreshes our hope. The disciples, they wanted to stay because it does something to them, and they needed that because they're going into the Passion Week where God maybe knew that they needed that in their life, but the mountaintop gives us this hope. It's this moment of grandeur and this moment of beauty and this moment of excitement. But here's the thing, the mountaintop doesn't last forever. As we were diving into this content, I started looking up for like world records and people who actually climb like huge mountains and do all of this for a life. And there's this one woman, she holds the record for the most summits of Mount Everest. She's climbed it 9 times. Her name's Lakpa Sherpa. And she has climbed it, reached the summit 9 times, but she's also like a guide for groups. There's this really, really interesting interview with her where she said, there will be people that spend $10, $20, $30, $40, $50,000 on climbing Mount Everest in training, in travel, in gear, in preparation, all of that stuff. And they train for months or years or decades just with the hope of climbing Everest. And then they hike to the base camp and all of the elements, and they get to the highest camp on the mountain before the summit, and they have to stay there sometimes for weeks on end because their body has to acclimate to the altitude, they have to acclimate to the conditions, they have to wait for the weather to be just right. And when everything lines up just perfectly, they've spent maybe decades and tens of thousands of dollars, and maybe they know the next day is the day that they're gonna be able to summit. They have to get there at 5 a.m., and it is a 7-hour climb from that camp. And so they gear up and they start climbing, and from the base camp to the summit, 5,000 people have tried to make that trek, and there are 300 dead bodies along the way. Because when you die trying to climb Mount Everest, it is too resource intensive to recover your body. And so if you don't make it to the summit, your body doesn't leave there. And so it's just this grim reminder of how risky this is and how much work and effort and striving goes into that. And she said, when you get to the summit around 5 a.m., it is breathtaking. It is incredible. It is one of the most life-changing moments of anything you ever experienced, because everything in your life is pointed to this moment. She said, you have to set a timer for 20 minutes, and then it's time to go back down. 20 minutes. If you miss that window, you start running out of oxygen, you start running out of daylight and the elements and all of that stuff. And so a lifetime and tens of thousands of dollars for 20 minutes on the mountain. Those 20 minutes will change everything. She said those 20 minutes where you're able to just sit and look at the grandeur of the world are some of the most life-changing 20 minutes that you will ever have. Students, our life is not lived on the mountain. Our life is not lived in these mountaintop experiences. Yes, moments are made there and lives are changed there and pictures are taken there and hope is refreshed there, but life is not lived on the mountain. And too often we leave these moments and we go back into the rhythms of our life and we feel guilty because in a couple weeks we don't have that emotional high, but that's not what it's for. It's so that we can have the presence of mind and have the hope that when we go back down into the valleys, we go back down into the wild, we can trust the one who leads us because he took us to the mountain. We in the valley can trust the Lord because we know he is faithful. We know that the valleys don't last forever. We know that the mountains aren't forever, but it's this ebb and flow. And we're able to trust Jesus because he has given us that hope. He gives us that peace. And so as we go back into our lives, as we go back into the rhythms and the routines, which are good things, my question isn't, are you still gonna be this passionate, this emotional? My question is, are you gonna make the adjustments on the mountain to serve you in the valley? Are you gonna make the changes on the mountain and take a moment to appreciate the presence of God so that when you go into the rest of your life, into the drama and the tension and the frustration and the pain and the hurt of whatever's going on in your world, are you able to look back and say, I know it's not forever. I trust God. I trust God because I know who he is. The mountaintop gives us hope. And it reminds us that God calls us and draws us to himself. And so my hope is that this weekend has been a mountaintop experience for you. But even more, I hope it's given you a glimpse into what we were created to experience. I hope that it allows you to make maybe some changes in your life to reset your focus on him and give you hope. Because when we load up on those buses and we go back to our lives, there is a very real enemy who very much wants to destroy your life and wants to rain darkness into your story. We need these mountaintop experiences to look back and say, no, I know he is who he says he is. Would y'all stand as I pray for us? Lord, thank you for this weekend. Thank you for the hours of prayer from hundreds of people who have gone into it. Thank you for the moments of joy and the moments of freedom and the moments of pain and the moments of wrestling and the moments of just the inbreaking of your presence into our lives. And that experience we get that whispers to our soul, this is what we were created to have. So God, as we go into this last time of singing, my prayer is that we would say, yes, this weekend was a taste of heaven. We can trust you in the valley because we know that what lies beyond the wild is no match for you. We know that you are the one who leads us, you are the one who guides us, and you are the one who has paid our debt in the first place. And so regardless of the situation, regardless of what's happening, whether we are in the valley or in the mountains, we will praise you and glorify your name because we know you are good. In your name we pray, everybody said.